Congratulations on another exciting cookbook, Texture Over Taste. That I feel like that is so unique. People, when you think about cooking, you think about so many other things other than texture, and that is such a big component in cooking. The book promises to take readers on a journey, and you picked 6 fundamental textures. Talk to me kind of about that, and why was it important for you to focus on textures in this new book compared to your last books?
Yeah, it's funny. Well, first off, thank you for the love there. I appreciate that. The interesting thing about cookbooks is there's so many of them now. And I feel like, I mean this with love and respect, and I'm not going to name names, but I think that everybody and their dog has done a book at this point, right? And a cookbook, to be specific, not just a book, but a cookbook, because for some reason it's regarded as the thing that I guess people do, which I think is kind of a little bit of a disrespect to the people who have spent, their lives, working their asses off in restaurants or in food. And, I'm talking like people who have committed decades slash their lives to an art form, which is cuisine. What you see over and over in the cookbook space is kind of the same concept, where it's like, here's your appetizers, here's your proteins, and here's a bio about me that you probably don't care about. And that's like the market. And so when my publisher came to me and they're like, oh, we want to do another book. The first book did really well. And we were really happy with that. They were kind of like, well, what do you want to do? And I was like, I really don't want to do the same thing as everybody else. And I was really looking at my experiences as when I was line cooking and working in restaurants and fine dining and all these different things. And I'm like, what really differentiates somebody who can make great food and somebody who sucks? There's got to be something. There's got to be a key here. And I remember like one of the biggest revelations for me was understanding that the only thing that we tend to focus on, especially in cookbooks, and you hear it over and over, and there's tons of books dedicated to it, which is flavor. We always talk about flavor, and it's got to taste this way, it's got to taste that way, you got to have the right amount of salt, got to have the right amount of, acid or a little bit of spice or whatever, right? Umami, that was a big topic in like 2012. But the irony is that's the easiest thing to acquire. It requires no skill, really, honestly, until you get into the minutia of it, because you can make anything taste good with a ramen packet, right? Because ramen, let's be honest, MSG tastes great. Texture is the only thing that requires real technique to achieve, or paying attention to what you're doing to achieve. And so that's really what I wanted to focus on this book, is I was like, well, instead of expanding on flavor, why don't we expand on the other half of the conversation? And try to explain it to people in a way that anybody can utilize it, whether you don't know what the you're doing or you're a chef.
Oh, that makes sense. And it's super smart and interesting too. It's something that, like you said, people are not thinking of. So that's going to be great. I'm sure it'll be huge success for you, which is amazing. The variety of recipes in the book. I love that you keep it to the classics, but they're always elevated, from like the mac and cheese with the cheese foam. How do you decide, what recipes to include? And walk me through kind of where you draw inspiration from when you are choosing these as well.
I love to say that like I'm hyper calculated in the sense of, oh, well, there's a story on how these recipes, but the reality is, I think that I picked recipes for this book based off of what I felt best highlighted each chapter. And since the chapters are broken up by texture, it felt right to pick items that I felt were like, there's no doubt in anyone's mind that the primary texture of this food exists in this chapter. And this is the best of that, the best, most understood of that marker.
Do you have a favorite texture, or one that you really enjoyed featuring in the book?
Probably crunchy, honestly. And I think that's probably most people's favorite, because it's one of the few things that, like, there's not that many things that you can sit down and just eat over and over and somehow still get the same damn dopamine response, sitting on the couch eating chips, or like you go to a party and there's like somebody has like chips and guac. It's like, dude, why?
Yeah, you can't resist every time, right?
There's an addictive quality to it, which we talked about in the book, of course, as to like why it's addicting and how to like make a proper, because a lot of people associate, well, if it has a crunch, it's good. It's like, yeah, but what kind of crunch is really going to make somebody go, oh, this is what I want?
Did you figure out what kind of crunch though?
There's sort of a layering, right? And I think it comes down to, first, you need to choose the food. what it is you're making. Is it a protein or is it like a starch? You know, if it's like a starch, you kind of want a little bit of air incorporated in the crunch, like a little bit of, you know, sort of like a clean crunch, so to speak, rather than like a glass-like crunch, right? Like hazelnut praline, glass-like crunch, but potato chip, sort of an airy, light, tender crunch.
Totally.
And so I would say most people would want the airy, light, tender one because it's less aggressive than a really brittle, exaggerated crunch.
I get that, and more addictive. That's why we eat so many chips. Your approach to cooking is described as fun, but also a little dangerous. I'm curious, what has been the most dangerous culinary experience you've had so far in your career?
Probably working tempura station in a Japanese restaurant, traditional tempura. Traditional tempura is done in these gigantic copper nabes, which is basically just like a giant pot. And when I say big, I mean like it's the size of like two people put together if you warp them in the shape of a circle. So like it's big. Normally you need two people to carry these things, and you fill it up with oil and you put it on a gigantic burner that looks like a jet engine, and you get chopsticks, and that's it. Good luck and God bless.
Lost a finger or anything?
No, well, the funny thing is knife skill should be in a place where that's not an issue, but like, it's just, you know, it's just hot oil is so dangerous. And so like you're slinging things in the oil, it's splashing all over you.
Yeah.
You're dunking your hand in tempura batter and then submerging it into the hot oil to use the tempura batter as a protective glove. So you can lightly drop in ebi and other ingredients so that they don't like, they don't get a weird structure when they splash in the oil.
Oh, wow. That is dangerous. I don't know if I could do that. Give you props.
It can be fun.
I'm sure. You make the best of it. You're well known for making gourmet versions of fast food items, which I think everyone loves watching those videos and they appreciate that and those recipes. Do you have a favorite fast food item that you don't think, you know, it can't be improved upon? Is there something that maybe you've tried to make gourmet and it just doesn't work?
Honestly, what I will like, the first thing I'll say is I think anything can be better. Even the recipes that I make that are better than their fast food counterparts can always be better. You can always look back, and that could be applied to anything in life, right? Like whatever your last at bat was for, I don't know, some marketing event or whatever, like, well, how could I have done that better? And so I don't ever think that the evolution of making things better stops. That being said, when you say like food, like, do you mean like a specific item, like from a specific restaurant? Or yeah, man, I would say like the closest to, you know, it's funny. We actually recently did this video where I tasted every major fast food burger in America, and Steak and Shake won. And if all of their burgers are like the burger that I had in that video, I would say that that is as close to as a proper burger as I can think of. And it can be enjoyed without the necessity of being improved. And if it's not that, for sure, In-N-Out's burgers, but not their fries, because their fries suck.
Definitely need improvement.
It's an unfortunate reality. Yeah.
But you think the In-N-Out burger doesn't need any improvement?
I think it's great as it is. You know, I mean, I think it can be improved, but I think that the experience is there and whole as it is.
Okay, that's fair. I really like your take on that. Is there a video of yours that you think which one do you think has blown people's minds the most? I'm curious. Or a video too, on the other hand, where your fans and followers were like, no, like they did not like your recreation or your new approach to something.
Well, I've had both of those many times. I would say the one where they disliked my recreation the most was probably the Krispy Kreme video. They felt like I didn't win. And I was like, I don't know how you can say that because you weren't here. But what they didn't like was that the hole that I made for my donut was too big. And they were not a fan of that. They were like, that is too big. And then there were a bunch of memes of the thumbnail that were really inappropriate. And I was like, oh boy. And so there was that. And then I would say like, what's blown people's mind the most? I mean, we've done some pretty interesting stuff lately. I think probably the most shocking to people so far was a video where we went all the way to Norway in the Arctic Circle to live fish king crab. And then I cooked against the head chef of the largest Norwegian cruise ship line in the world, went head to head. And then I jumped into the Arctic Circle because he cheated for the record, and overseasoned my shit. I absolutely should have won that challenge. I basically jumped into the frozen ocean with underwear on at the end of the video.
Oh, wow. What people were reacting to that? They loved it or?
They loved it. Yeah, they were huge fans. They wanted to see more agony from me in the frozen water. And I was like, I'm sorry. Like, I'll be in more pain next time.
Oh my gosh, wow, you're a champ.
It was a good time. That was a hell of a shoot.
Sure.
We did that entire shoot running off of probably 2 hours of sleep and 3 days of shooting and like 28 hours of travel. It was pretty wild. Won't forget that.
I'm sure you won't. Sounds very cold.
Yeah.
You recently showed people that they had been cutting their onions wrong. And I'm curious if you saw Kendall Jenner cutting the cucumber wrong in 2022. And
Yeah.
when did you realize people don't know how to cut things the proper way? And what prompted this onion video?
I think most people, when they cook, do most things the wrong way. But like, there's not necessarily a right way either, which I find funny. But the Kendall Jenner thing, a lot of people sent me that. I just chose not to say anything about it because it was so bad that I was just like, nah, I'm going to leave this one alone. I feel like she did that for likes, honestly. There's no way she thought that that was right.
I really think so. I
I don't know. I'm just like, that just doesn't make sense to me. You know what I mean? That'd be like if I was like, oh, I need to change the sheets on my bed. And then I threw my bed out the window so that I had more room to change the sheets.
It was like cringe.
Yeah. Yeah. But respect. Yeah. So I guess the onion thing, I think that was for a brunoise, which a lot of people don't know how to make that cut. And the method that I showed was a method that I learned working in fine dining, because it's not like the most fast method, but when you're working in a restaurant that, you only need like a cup and a half of perfectly finely diced brunoise onion, which is like, I'm talking like mathematical level of precision on these cuts. And the pieces of onion are maybe like slightly larger than a grain of sand, but they're a perfect cube. You need to do it that way, at least to make it easier when you're training cooks. And so I wanted to share that method with people because I figured people hadn't seen it and people already struggle cutting onions properly. And so I applied a lot of that to all those other videos that I did in that too, which is like, oh, in fine dining, I did it like this. Maybe this will help people learn it better. Any
tips for the people that may not know how to cut cucumbers or other?
First tip, sharp knife. Okay. People overlook it 24/7. You hear it over and over. Like, you got to stop ignoring the whole, oh, well, I don't want to sharpen my knife. It's fine. It still cuts. It's like, yeah, but like one day you're going to have a sharp knife and you're going to cut a bunch of stuff. And you'll be like, oh my God, this is so much easier. Yeah, exactly.
Right.
Exactly. It's not just easier, it's also safer.
You've had so much success and you have worked in fine dining. You've worked in all different variations of the culinary world. Some people have criticized you for not being a professionally trained chef. I am curious, what's your response to that criticism?
What does professionally trained mean?
You tell me. I'm not sure.
Do they mean like not going to culinary school?
I think so. I think that's what that would mean.
I mean, by definition, I am professionally trained because I worked in fine dining for my whole life. So like, I'm a practitioner. I've worked in restaurants since I could work out, since I turned 18, basically, since I was legally allowed to work. So I've worked in some of the best restaurants in the South Central region of America, led kitchens. I trained people that came in and out of the kitchen the whole time. The only difference between me and I guess another chef is that I didn't go to culinary school, and that's about it.
To me, I don't know why people have that criticism. You are a practitioner, trained professional in everyone else's eyes. So just was curious if you had a response to that, and that was perfectly well said.
It's interesting. I haven't seen a ton of comments about that. I think the only thing I've ever seen is people basically try to say like, oh, he's never worked in restaurants, but you can go ask the restaurants that I worked at.
Yeah. Definitely. And you know what? Look at all of the success that you've had. So it doesn't really matter anyway. I believe you.
Totally. Most of the people, well, the funny thing is most of the people that I trained went to culinary school and they were twice my age. So I was training like 50-year-old dudes who went to culinary school. Like, there you go.
There you go. So, there's your response.
Yeah.
I love it. I want to ask you because you've been open about this before, and I think it's admirable and courageous. You lost over 100 pounds at age 17. How is your relationship with your body and food now? How are you doing? I mean, you look amazing.
Appreciate that. It's interesting. It happened at such a, I feel like, evolutionary time in most people's lives, which is like that sort of like transition into adulthood, and like you're kind of like your frontal lobe is developing and all sorts like that. I mean, my relationship with food and like my, physical health and fitness like is pretty solid. I've never had an, it's funny, like I think when you're, like age 16, 15, you have like this insane level of body dysmorphia and so on and so forth. I
Mhm.
don't really think about that anymore. I just like, I go to the gym pretty much every day for an hour, and I come home and I eat things that make me feel good. But like, if I want to have a cheeseburger, like I'm not going to not have a cheeseburger, and I don't like have to rush myself to the gym to get that done.
That's great. Because our culture instills so many feelings of guilt around food and eating certain foods and how you should feel about that. How do you navigate that on your own? You kind of just mentioned this, but how do you resist or do things or help
Yeah, I mean,
others? You had such a journey. How do you help others navigate that as well?
I think people just need to do it and have intention for long enough to develop a balance for themselves. And everybody's balance is different. At this point, haven't we seen enough fitness iterations to realize that there's about 1 billion ways to skin a cat? You can lose weight 1 million ways. You can maintain your weight 1 million different ways. You can diet 1 million different ways, train 1 million different ways. Just pick something, try it, and keep doing that. And eventually, it's a lifelong commitment to find balance in your life. It never ends. It's a ladder that never ends in your career. It's a ladder that never ends in your personal life. It's a matter that never ends in your physical health aspect of your life. And I think that if people are just committed to figuring it out and not being so hard on themselves, then they'll probably figure it out.
What ways do you incorporate balance in your everyday life? I know you mentioned going to the gym and you manage balance with your food and your food relationship, but you're also cooking these amazing recipes every day and experiencing, gluttonous food per se. How do you kind of keep the balance in your life?
It's so interesting. I just don't like care about it anymore per se, and in like a very healthy way, you know what I mean? Where like I kind of go based off how I physically feel. If I'm like, man, I'm tired. If I eat this chicken sandwich, I'm gonna feel so tired. I don't really want to eat that much of it, but I'm definitely gonna eat half of it because I want it, or whatever. Or maybe I do eat the whole chicken sandwich and it is what it is, and I don't beat myself up over it because I know that the rest of my day is going to be pretty balanced. Or I don't have like a specific methodology, but I tend to like go into phases where maybe if I know I'm going to have a heavy week where there's no way I'm going to be able to diet, or I need to be able to eat certain foods for my job, then I'm just going to eat those foods. And then the next week I'll just be like, all right, cool. I'll just eat a little healthier this week. No big deal. And that's it. And I don't beat myself up for doing what I did the week prior, but I just eat better the following week. That may not work for everybody, but it works for me.
Mm-hmm.
But this is also after like years of like, measuring my food and doing my dieting. And like, I know what I should and shouldn't eat and how much of it I should eat just by looking at it.
Like you said, it's been several years. Was there a turning or a tipping point in that time in your life where you were like, oh, I gotta, I have to get back on track?
It's a good question. You mean like before I lost all the weight or after?
Yeah, well, both.
Well, I mean, before I lost all the weight, it was pretty obvious. I mean, I knew that I was way too big for somebody that age, and I was not happy with myself. And I think like we're in an interesting place now in the world where it's like, it's like, oh, it's okay to, to look and feel a certain way, and you can just live like that. It's like, but maybe if you don't feel good about yourself, you can, and there's nothing wrong with wanting to improve upon yourself. And so I wanted that improvement, and it was very much of like, well, let me see if I can do this thing. Let me really commit to it. And it honestly taught me a lot about life, where it was like most things, depending on how big the achievement are achievable, but it depends on how much you're willing to put in to achieve it. The bigger the thing, the more you got to put in to achieve it. The more pain there will be involved to achieve it. May require a better mentality or so on and so forth. So that was the pivoting point for me there. In terms of like today, if I'm like, oh, I had a heavy week last week, it's usually, honestly, I like how I physically feel, like not emotionally, physically. Like I'm like, oh, like my back hurts, feeling sluggish, my energy levels aren't feeling good. I feel great when I'm like eating well and working out. And that's like the biggest draw for me.
You seem so, healthy mentally and physically. I love your outlook on everything, especially being a chef and having to deal with food. It could be triggering, it could go a different way. So you seem like in such a healthy spirits. Congratulations on getting married recently. I wanted to ask you because food is such a big part of the wedding. I'm planning a wedding myself right now, and that is such a main component, and everyone looks forward to the food. People remember the food. Were you a super stickler about your wedding food? And how did you and your wife navigate that, and what did you guys serve?
First off, good luck with the planning. It's a doozy, but it is, I will say, I was one of those people who was like, this is stupid. This is not worth it. I could use this money to go put in an investment, and in 10 years, it would be worth a bajillion dollars.
Correct.
But it ended up feeling pretty worth it. That being said, the food got to a point where basically my wife, Kate, was like, this is your realm, buddy. You got this. And she bowed out and focused on all the other stuff. Yeah, the food was a challenge. I would not have wanted to be the person on the other end making it, because I wasn't like an asshole, but I was just very much like, look, don't f this up, and don't argue with me either, respectfully. And so we actually did two events. We did one in Italy where it was just close family. I flew out my close family, Kate's close family, and that meal was catered by a 2 Michelin star restaurant in Sorrento, which was good. And honestly, it was amazing. They turned out great. They did a great job plating it. Their pacing was awesome. There was the seasoning was good. There was like one thing, I think it was like the risotto, I wanted a bit more portion size, but like other than that, like can't complain. But the funny thing is, leading up to it, they would send me this like insane invoice and then not respond for like weeks on end. And then they argued with me on like what should be on the menu. And I was like, you're about to go into the atmosphere. Just say yes. You know what I mean? It was basically how that went. But they were awesome. And the chef there was a badass, and I love them all. They worked out great. And then the second one in Houston actually turned out pretty well. On top of that, because I had the experience prior from the Italians, who are much harder to work with than Americans. I'm
actually planning an Italian wedding right now, so I get it. They take weeks to respond.
They're gonna stress you out. It's gonna be hard, and it's gonna seem like they're gonna fuck it up, but somehow magically they will pull it together, and it's gonna be great.
I am crossing my fingers on that. Can you, before you go, you share what was on your wedding menu, what you served?
So we had, because it was lemon season in Sorrento, lemons are like a big thing there, limoncello, so on. We did this really cool lemon and lobster risotto. We did this really nice, I can't remember the name of it, but it was sort of like it was kind of like a lasagna, but it was done with a single roulade style noodle that they then bruleed, and that was really nice. We did sort of like an eggplant parmigiana. We had a gigantic hors d'oeuvre selection before the meal. So we had like all sorts of like crudos and like, arancini and mini risotto servings and prosciutto, fried prosciutto and little caprese salads and all sorts of things like that. And then the dessert, we had like a huge variety of desserts. I don't even remember everything. It was just like a dessert after dessert after dessert. And almost like a red wine like glaze. It was pretty good. It was good.
Wow, that sounds fantastic. I'm sure it was amazing.